October 26, 2025. Workers in orange vests cordoned off Judiciary Square in Washington, D.C. Behind the barrier, a crane slowly lowered a 12-foot bronze statue back onto its pedestal. This wasn't a founding father or civil rights leader. This was Confederate Brigadier General Albert Pike, whose troops removed body parts from Union soldiers and who declared after the war that only white people were fit to govern America. 2 months earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced another Confederate monument would follow. The Arlington National Cemetery Memorial depicting enslaved people as happy servants would return by 2027. His justification? It never should have been taken down by woke lemmings. Unlike the left, we don't believe in erasing American history. We honor it. While these monuments to defeated traitors were being restored, a different kind of erasure was taking place. 26,000 images were being deleted from military websites. Pages honoring the Tuskegee Airmen, profiles of the first Black Medal of Honor recipients, stories of the Navajo code talkers, tributes to the first women combat pilots, all flagged for removal. In 2025, the United States government made a choice about whose sacrifices deserved commemoration. The answer wasn't the men who defended their country, it was the men who betrayed it. Albert Pike wasn't honored for military brilliance. His single major battle ended in disgrace. Born in Boston in 1809, Pike moved to Arkansas in the 1830s, where he became a lawyer specializing in Native American claims against the federal government. By the 1850s, he'd joined the Know-Nothing Party, specifically because the Whigs wouldn't embrace slavery strongly enough for his taste. When the Know-Nothings also proved insufficiently committed to the institution, Pike walked out of their 1856 National Convention alongside other Southern delegates, demanding a stronger pro-slavery platform. As secession approached in 1861, Pike's expertise with Native American affairs made him valuable to the Confederate cause. Arkansas appointed him commissioner to Indian Territory, tasking him with negotiating treaties to bring the 5 civilized tribes into the Confederate fold. Pike was extraordinarily effective. He negotiated alliances with the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole nations. His pitch was simple but powerful. The Confederacy would grant them something the United States never had, the promise of their own state if the South won the war. It worked. Cherokee Chief John Ross signed a treaty in October 1861. Thousands of Native Americans, including many who themselves owned enslaved people, joined the Confederate military. The Confederate War Department rewarded Pike's diplomatic success by commissioning him a brigadier general in August 1861 and giving him command of the Department of Indian Territory. His military career would prove far less impressive. On March 7, 1862, Pike led nearly 900 men from the 1st and 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles into the Battle of Pea Ridge in northwest Arkansas. Confederate General Earl Van Dorn had ordered Pike to bring his forces despite treaty provisions, stating these troops weren't obligated to fight outside Indian Territory. Pike obeyed. The battle opened near the village of Leetown. Pike's forces, alongside other Confederate cavalry, charged a Union battery positioned at Foster's Farm. The initial assault succeeded. Union cavalrymen fell back. Confederate forces captured the artillery pieces. Then came the incident that would define Pike's legacy and provide fodder for Northern newspapers for months. At least 8 Union soldiers from the 3rd Iowa Cavalry were found with body parts removed. Several others had been mutilated. Multiple witnesses reported that some of the victims were still alive when the acts occurred. Contemporary accounts described bodies treated in ways that violated every convention of warfare between civilized nations. Pike himself claimed to be horrified when he learned what had occurred. He issued orders forbidding such conduct in future battles and even court-martialed one soldier for ending the life of a wounded Federal. But the damage to his reputation was permanent. Northern newspapers seized on the incident. Headlines screamed about Indian savagery and Confederate barbarism. Union General Samuel Curtis wrote directly to his Confederate counterpart, demanding an explanation for warfare contrary to civilized practices. The incident at Pea Ridge wasn't the sum total of Pike's military failures. His command fell apart over the following months. He clashed repeatedly with superior officers over strategy and resources. Major General Thomas Hindman charged him with mishandling money and supplies and ordered his detention. Pike resigned his commission in July 1862. He was briefly held on charges of insubordination and treason before his resignation was accepted in November. After the war, Pike relocated first to Canada, then to New York, unable to earn trust from either his former comrades or Union victors. President Andrew Johnson granted him a formal pardon in August 1865, allowing him to resume public life. He eventually settled in Washington, D.C., where he devoted himself to his true passion, Freemasonry. Pike's views on race hardened rather than softened as Reconstruction progressed. In one widely circulated statement, he declared with absolute certainty, "The white race, and that race alone, shall govern this country. It is the only one that is fit to govern, and it is the only one that shall." His opposition to black suffrage was absolute and unchanging. He died in Washington in April 1891, having spent his final decades not in military service, but rising through the ranks of Freemasonry, where he rewrote rituals and became Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the Scottish Rites Southern Jurisdiction. Pike received his monument because of Freemasonry. As Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the Scottish Rites Southern Jurisdiction, he'd become their most prominent figure. In the 1890s, Masons lobbied Congress for public land in Washington to build his memorial. The Grand Army of the Republic, Union veterans, immediately objected. A Confederate general's monument in the Capitol would disgrace Union soldiers' memory, they argued. The Masons persisted, emphasizing Pike's philosophical contributions while downplaying his Confederate service. They commissioned sculptor Gaetano Trentanova to depict Pike in civilian Masonic robes rather than Confederate uniform. The statue was dedicated October 23, 1901, with speeches carefully praising Pike as scholar and poet, barely mentioning his military service. But everyone understood. Pike was being honored precisely because he'd been a Confederate. Masonry simply provided acceptable cover. The statue would stand uncontroversially for decades, defended as honoring Pike's Masonic work rather than Confederate service. The distinction was always false. In 2020, protesters toppled it during the George Floyd demonstrations and set it ablaze. It was removed to storage. Most assumed it would eventually reach a museum, its history explained rather than celebrated. 5 years later, it returned to its pedestal. The Arlington Confederate Memorial's story begins with political maneuvering dressed as commemoration. After Reconstruction ended and white supremacists regained Southern control, attitudes about Confederate dead shifted dramatically. In 1898, President William McKinley, himself a Union veteran, toured the South to promote national reconciliation. He was disturbed by the condition of Confederate graves in federal custody and pledged to end discriminatory treatment. By 1900, Congress had authorized reinterring 267 Confederate dead from sites around Washington into a segregated section of Arlington, arranged in concentric circles around a central space. On the original plans, this space was marked with a single letter, M, for Memorial. Confederate groups immediately began discussing monuments. The United Daughters of the Confederacy took the lead. Founded in Nashville in 1894, the UDC became the South's most powerful white women's organization, claiming nearly 100,000 members by World War I. The Daughters had a mission that went far beyond simple commemoration. They were engaged in a comprehensive campaign to reshape how Americans understood the Civil War through lost cause mythology. In their version of history, the Confederacy hadn't fought to preserve slavery, but to defend states' rights. Confederate soldiers weren't traitors, but heroes. Reconstruction wasn't an attempt to secure rights for freed people, but a vengeful occupation designed to punish the South. Enslaved people hadn't longed for freedom, but had remained loyal to kind masters. This narrative became the UDC's primary export, and they pursued it with remarkable sophistication. The Daughters reviewed school textbooks, demanding changes or threatening to cancel contracts with publishers who didn't present the Confederacy favorably. They ensured Confederate battle flags hung in white classrooms across the South. They created the Children of the Confederacy to indoctrinate young people, printing catechisms with questions and answers for white children to memorize. These booklets taught that Reconstruction was unjust, that federal occupation sought revenge, and what they called Negro domination, and that only the Ku Klux Klan had saved the South from this fate. The UDC's relationship with the Klan wasn't subtle or hidden. They elevated the terrorist organization to heroic status in their literature and commemorations. In 1917, they commemorated the Klan's 1866 founding with a plaque in Pulaski, Tennessee. In 1926, a UDC chapter in Concord, North Carolina, erected a monument explicitly honoring the Ku Klux Klan, with an inscription praising their actions during Reconstruction. But their most visible legacy was monuments. Between 1890 and the early 1920s, the Daughters funded between 450 and 700 Confederate statues, markers, and buildings across the United States. These weren't random acts of commemoration. The monuments served multiple calculated purposes. They claimed public space for white citizens, particularly at courthouses where Confederate soldiers in stone stood watch over the machinery of Jim Crow justice. Recent studies have found statistically significant correlations between the number of Confederate monuments in a county and the number of documented racial violence incidents, demonstrating the direct link between these statues and intimidation of black citizens. When the UDC turned to Arlington in 1906, after receiving permission from Secretary of War William Howard Taft, they knew exactly what they wanted: a monument celebrating the Confederacy while depicting slavery as a benign institution. They found their sculptor in Moses Jacob Ezekiel. Born in Richmond in 1844 to Jewish immigrants, Ezekiel grew up in what would become the Confederate capital. At 17, he enrolled at Virginia Military Institute, becoming their first Jewish cadet. On May 15, 1864, he fought at the Battle of New Market, where VMI cadets, some as young as 15, were thrown into Confederate battle lines. The cadets charged across a muddy field that would become known as the Field of Lost Shoes. 10 cadets died in the fighting. Ezekiel stayed by the bedside of his dying friend, Cadet Thomas Garland Jefferson, reading to him from the Bible until he passed. That battle became central to VMI mythology and to Ezekiel's identity. The Confederate flag hung in his Rome studio for 40 years. After the war, encouraged by Robert E. Lee, Ezekiel pursued sculpture. He moved to Berlin in 1869, studying at the Royal Academy. In 1873, he became the first non-German to win the school's prestigious art competition, a remarkable achievement that established his international reputation. He established a studio in Rome and spent the rest of his career there, creating heroic, lifelike sculptures that often meditated on themes of patriotism for both the United States and the Confederacy. His most personal work was the New Market Monument at VMI, unveiled in 1903. The bronze sculpture, titled Virginia Mourning Her Dead, stands over the graves of 6 of the 10 cadets who died in the battle, including his friend Jefferson. The monument was a gift to the Institute. When the UDC approached Ezekiel in 1906, the Daughters were worried. Ezekiel was rumored to be temperamental. He'd lost several competitions for federal Civil War monuments and had publicly stated his opposition to art competitions. To secure his cooperation, the UDC Design Committee made an extraordinary offer: complete artistic authority. Ezekiel could design the memorial however he wanted, without interference. Ezekiel accepted enthusiastically. He waived his sculptor's fee in exchange for 2 conditions. First, total artistic control over the design. Second, burial at the foot of the memorial when he died. Working from his Rome studio starting in 1910, Ezekiel created a monument that stands 32 feet tall and contains 32 life-size figures arranged around a central shaft. The dominating feature is a female figure representing the South, crowned with olive leaves symbolizing peace, extending a laurel wreath. Her face is positioned to receive maximum sunlight throughout the day as she gazes longingly toward her homeland. Below her, arranged around the monument's base, are scenes depicting various classes of Southern society going to war. A military officer kisses his infant child, held by a weeping black woman identified in UDC descriptions as a mammy, while another child clings to her skirts. A blacksmith leaves his anvil and tools as his sorrowful wife looks on. A clergyman and his wife say goodbye to their teenage son who has enlisted. And critically, deliberately, Ezekiel included what he called faithful black servants. The mammy with the white officer's children, an enslaved man following his master into battle. These figures weren't accidents or artistic flourishes added for visual interest. Ezekiel included them because he wanted to undermine what he considered lies about slavery told in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and similar abolitionist works. He wanted to present what he called the correct version of history, one in which enslaved people supported the Confederate cause and remained loyal to benevolent masters. The memorial included a Latin inscription referencing the lost cause. Every single element of the design reinforced one specific narrative. The Confederacy was noble, its cause was just, its soldiers were heroes, and enslaved people were content with their condition. President Woodrow Wilson unveiled it on June 4, 1914. The date wasn't coincidental. It was the 106th anniversary of Jefferson Davis's birth, the President of the Confederate States. Wilson's dedication. Speech emphasized national reconciliation, speaking of chapters in American history being closed and former enemies admiring one another. But reconciliation on whose terms? The memorial presented slavery as benign and enslaved people as willing participants in their own subjugation. It glorified men who had taken up arms against the United States to preserve the institution of slavery. And it did so with the blessing of the President of the United States, in the nation's most sacred burial ground. For decades, most U.S. presidents sent Memorial Day wreaths to be laid at the memorial. The monument became so familiar that visitors stopped seeing it clearly. After 2017's Charlottesville violence, 20 of Ezekiel's own descendants wrote The Washington Post. The monument glorifies owning human beings and implies black collusion in their enslavement. As proud as we are of Moses's work, remove that statue. Their appeal was ignored. Then came 2020 and George Floyd. The Naming Commission, created by Congress after Trump's veto override, found the memorial perpetuated lost cause mythology and recommended removal. On December 21, 2023, workers dismantled it. That seemed final. Then came the 2024 election. January 20, 2025. President Trump's first executive order ended DEI programs government-wide, calling them illegal and immoral discrimination programs. Defense Secretary Hegseth got 90 days to report all DEI programs and 30 days to create elimination plans. The order also prohibited the military from teaching that America's founding documents were racist or sexist, and banned instruction on what the administration termed gender ideology. In March, Trump issued Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, directing officials to identify memorials removed since January 2020 to perpetuate false reconstruction of American history. The message was unmistakable. Confederate monuments represented truth. Recognition of black service members represented falsification. August 4th, the National Park Service announced Pike's restoration to Judiciary Square, citing historic preservation responsibilities. August 5th, Hegseth announced the Arlington Memorial would return by 2027. It never should have been taken down by woke lemmings, he declared, calling it the Reconciliation Monument, a recent rebrand never used during its century at Arlington. Hegseth emphasized that, unlike the left, the administration believed in honoring rather than erasing American history. The administration's definition of which history deserved honoring was about to become very clear. While Confederate monuments were being restored, the Pentagon began implementing DEI content elimination. Internal guidance was distributed to military services listing specific words and concepts that should be flagged for removal. The instructions, later obtained by news organizations, revealed the scope. Remove content recognizing people who were the first of a specific group to achieve something. Remove references to heritage months celebrating various cultures. Remove content spotlighting race, sex, color, or ethnicity. Remove anything promoting diversity as a strength of the military. What followed was chaos. The guidance was vague enough that different commanders and office directors interpreted it differently, some going too far and others not far enough. And the people tasked with making these decisions lived in fear. Would there be retaliation if they didn't remove enough content? Were those going too far doing so out of genuine agreement with the policy, or out of malicious compliance, trying to make the purge so obvious and painful that it would have to be rolled back? The result was a digital bonfire of military history. The Air Force initially removed training courses that included videos of the Tuskegee Airmen, the pioneering black pilots who fought in World War II and proved that black Americans could serve as combat pilots when the military establishment insisted they couldn't. The removal drew White House criticism for malicious compliance, and the Air Force quickly restored the content. But thousands of other removals proceeded without correction. Pages about the Navajo Code talkers disappeared from Defense Department websites. These were the Native American Marines whose use of their indigenous language created an unbreakable code during World War II, contributing directly to victory in the Pacific. Navajo Nation President Boo Nygren reported that White House officials told him an AI-powered automated review process looking for DEI content had flagged anything mentioning Navajo for removal. A profile of a paratrooper of Navajo heritage was deleted. A history of indigenous women fighting in wars throughout American history was removed. Content about National American Indian Heritage Month was taken down and never restored. The Air Force deleted a biography of retired Colonel Nicole Malachowski, the first woman to fly with the Thunderbirds demonstration squadron. The Marine Corps removed posts about the first women to pass Marine infantry training, a historic achievement that had required overcoming institutional resistance. References to World War II Medal of Honor recipient Private First Class Harold Gonsalves were flagged for deletion. Most bizarrely, several images were marked for removal simply because they contained the word gay in the file name or caption. Photos of service members with gay as a last name were flagged. An image of the Enola Gay, the B-29 aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, was initially marked for deletion because gay appeared in the file name. The automated system couldn't distinguish between a historic aircraft's name and content actually related to diversity initiatives. By March 2025, the Associated Press had obtained a database showing that 26,000 images and posts had been flagged for removal. The vast majority targeted women and minorities. Many highlighted notable milestones. In military history, moments when barriers were broken and new ground was claimed. The diversity of what was being removed revealed that this wasn't a careful, thoughtful process of distinguishing DEI programming from historical fact. It was a dragnet, sweeping up anything associated with diversity, regardless of its historical significance or accuracy. A Defense Department employee, speaking anonymously because they feared retaliation, described the process as chaotic and frightening. Workers were taking screenshots of pages marked for removal, knowing they might never be restored, and wanting some record that these achievements had once been recognized. One Marine Corps official reported that a single defense civilian employee was responsible for identifying content for removal across the entire service. That person had identified at least 10,000 images and stories, with 3,600 removed by March. The total didn't count more than 1,600 social media sites that hadn't yet been addressed. By April 2025, a Government Accountability Office report confirmed that the Pentagon had cut or restructured 188 DEI-related jobs since early 2024. The first wave of cuts came under the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, which required all DEI positions to be reduced to certain grade levels or eliminated entirely. The second wave came under Trump's executive orders. By the end of April, no DEI-related positions remained in the United States military. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell defended the removals while acknowledging some problems. Because of AI tools and other software, some important content was incorrectly pulled offline to be reviewed. He said, "History is not DEI. When content is either mistakenly removed or maliciously removed, we continue to work quickly to restore it." But Parnell also made the administration's position crystal clear. The previous administration's zealous and destructive commitment to DEI not only divided our nation and weakened our force, but it also reduced our country's finest to their immutable characteristics. The statement revealed the underlying logic of the entire operation. Recognizing that someone was the first black pilot or first female Marine, acknowledging that they had overcome discrimination and institutional barriers to achieve something, was reducing them to their immutable characteristics rather than celebrating their achievement as individuals. Telling the story of the Tuskegee Airmen wasn't American military history. It was divisive DEI programming. But restoring monuments to men who literally divided the nation, who took up arms against the United States, who fought to preserve the institution of slavery. That was honoring history rather than erasing it. The double standard was impossible to miss. Albert Pike, whose troops removed body parts from Union soldiers and who spent his post-war years declaring that only white people were fit to govern, deserved his statue carefully restored in the nation's capital. The Tuskegee Airmen, who fought for a country that denied them basic rights, and proved through their courage and skill that institutional racism was built on lies, had their training videos removed from Air Force systems. Moses Ezekiel's memorial, which explicitly depicted enslaved people as content and loyal to their masters, would be carefully returned to its place of honor at Arlington National Cemetery. Meanwhile, pages honoring actual black service members who fought and gave their lives for America disappeared from Pentagon websites. The pattern wasn't subtle. This was about whose service mattered, whose sacrifices would be remembered, and the administration had made its choice clear. Honor the people who fought to destroy the United States rather than those who defended it. The base renaming controversy made this explicit. Under Biden, 9 Army bases named for Confederate generals were renamed honoring diverse service members. Fort Bragg, named for slave owner Braxton Bragg, became Fort Liberty. Fort Lee became Fort Gregg Adams, honoring Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams, commander of the only black Women's Army Corps unit deployed overseas during World War II. Congress mandated these changes. Trump reversed them using a technicality, finding obscure service members with the same surnames to technically honor different people while restoring Confederate-era names. In February 2025, Fort Liberty became Fort Bragg again, officially for Private First Class Roland L. Bragg, who served in World War II. In June, Trump announced 7 more bases would revert. At Fort Bragg, his justification was revealing. "We won a lot of battles out of those forts. It's no time to change, and I'm superstitious. I like to keep it going, right?" Military success depended on maintaining names, honoring men who fought against the United States, he argued. Superstition mattered more than accurate history. The timing was pointed. Bases renamed to honor diverse Americans were reverting to Confederate names. Monuments to defeated insurrectionists were being restored. Actual heroes who served the country rather than betraying it were being erased. This wasn't about history. It was about which history America would choose to tell. Resistance revealed how attitudes had shifted. Ezekiel's own descendants had disowned his memorial. Civil rights organizations mobilized. Veterans groups condemned the reversals. Historians cited decades of scholarship debunking lost cause narratives. Even some conservative commentators questioned the optics, but the administration pushed forward. By October 2025, Pike's statue stood in Judiciary Square once more, carefully cleaned and restored. The Arlington Memorial is scheduled for 2027 return, and across Pentagon databases, the Purge continued. Tens of thousands of images and pages removed, making it harder to teach young people that Black Americans served and sacrificed, that Native Americans' contributions mattered, that women had always been part of America's military story. The administration's defenders claimed this was about merit, not race, that DEI focused too much on diversity, not capability, that the military should judge people solely on performance. But the argument collapsed immediately. Recognizing someone overcame discrimination wasn't reducing them to race or gender. It was acknowledging additional obstacles and celebrating perseverance. The Tuskegee Airmen's story was about merit and capability in the face of institutional racism. Erasing that didn't promote merit. It erased truth. Meanwhile, the administration literally restored monuments to men whose accomplishment was betraying their country. Pike's career was marked by failure and scandal. The Arlington Memorial was commissioned by an organization that elevated the KKK to heroic status. These weren't monuments to merit. They were monuments to white supremacy as America's organizing principle. There's larger context. The restoration of Confederate monuments isn't isolated. School districts ban books discussing racism. States restrict teaching about slavery's legacy. Efforts to teach accurate history about racial violence and civil rights are labeled divisive. The same people demanding Confederate monument restoration insist discussions of systemic racism be removed from classrooms. Its lost cause strategy updated for the 21st century. Control the narrative, whitewash the Confederacy, minimize slavery's role, depict racial justice efforts as divisive, punish challenges to sanitized versions. The UD pioneered this. They reviewed textbooks, threatened publishers, placed Confederate flags in classrooms, created propaganda teaching children the Confederacy fought for states' rights rather than slavery, that enslaved people were content, that Reconstruction was vindictive oppression. Their campaign succeeded for generations. Only recently has scholarship undone the damage. Now we're watching reversal to the 1920s, to peak lost cause influence. The Trump administration's actions are consistent with this project. Control which monuments stand, influence how people understand history. If Pike's statue stands while Black Medal of Honor recipients are removed from websites, you send a message about whose service matters. If Ezekiel's memorial returns while pages about first women in combat disappear, you shape who belongs in military narrative. Monuments aren't neutral. They're arguments about values, about who deserves honor. The daughters understood this. The Trump administration does too. There's cruel irony calling this honoring history. The Confederacy lasted 4 years, the United States nearly 250. The Confederacy ended more Americans than any foreign enemy. The United States defeated fascism, ended slavery, expanded rights, however imperfectly. The Confederacy fought explicitly to preserve enslaving millions. The United States fought to end that enslavement. Which deserves monuments? Which service deserves recognition? The answer should be obvious. In 2025, the government chose to honor traitors while erasing heroes. Pike's statue stands in Judiciary Square today. Few notice it. The Arlington Memorial awaits 2027 return, when presidents will presumably resume Memorial Day wreath traditions, when visitors will encounter lost cause mythology's towering bronze once more. Across Pentagon databases, gaps remain where recognition of diverse service members existed. Pages honoring first achievements, celebrating overcoming discrimination, telling complex truth about who served and what obstacles they faced. Many will never be restored. The history they contained has been deemed divisive, too focused on identity. This is the choice America made in 2025. Not through democratic process, but executive orders. A choice to restore monuments to men who betrayed their country while erasing recognition of those who served it. To honor lost cause mythology while dismissing diverse Americans' contributions. To prioritize the comfort of those wanting to remember the Confederacy as noble over the truth that it fought for slavery. Future generations will ask questions. Why, 160 years after Confederate defeat, were monuments to Confederate officers being restored to places of honor? Why was recognition of pioneering service members systematically deleted? Whose interests were served and whose dignity violated? They'll wonder how a country that fought to end slavery, that amended its constitution to guarantee equal protection, that sent its children to fight tyranny worldwide, could choose in 2025 to honor those who fought for slavery while erasing those who fought for freedom? The answers won't reflect well on this moment. Pike's statue stands today. Ezekiel's memorial will return in 2027. And somewhere in Pentagon databases, pages honoring the Tuskegee Airmen, Navajo Code talkers, first Black Medal of Honor recipients, first women in combat are marked for deletion or already gone. This is how America chose to honor its history, by celebrating those who betrayed it and erasing those who defended it. The statues they chose tell us everything about whose America they're building.